This is an NBC News special report. Here's Chuck Todd.
Good morning, everyone. We are coming on the air to bring you remarks from President Trump about the situation in Syria. It has been thrown into complete disarray in the past 2 weeks following the president's abrupt withdrawal of U.S. troops from the Turkey-Syria border, effectively abandoning Kurdish allies to the mercy of invading Turkish forces, some of whom, according to an American ambassador, have committed war crimes, and opening the door to greater Russian influence in the region. The president's move has been met with fierce bipartisan opposition, and he has struggled to try to explain and put a positive face on subsequent developments, including a tweet this morning trying to claim, quote, big success on Turkey-Syria border. All of this, of course, as the impeachment inquiry gathers steam this week on Capitol Hill. Let us check in to see what is it exactly the president is, we anticipate him saying. Let me go to Peter Alexander. He's standing by for us at the White House. So, Peter, big success is what? The one news we seem to know is that the big announcement is that Turkey and Russia are essentially going to have a joint force replacing the Americans.
Yeah, Chuck, you're exactly right. The president's statement in that tweet earlier this morning really at odds with the facts. He said that a safe zone has been created, but as you noted, it's Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, who filled that void, effectively dividing northern Syria between Turkish and Russian forces and also Russian-backed Syrian government forces. He also said that the Kurds are safe and have worked very nicely with us. We know from reporting on the ground that the Kurds are burying many of their own by the hundreds right now, and at this time they remain on the run. And in his tweet, he also says that captured ISIS prisoners secured. Well, it's obvious that the captured prisoners have been secured, but how about the uncaptured ones? Just yesterday, the defense secretary, Mark Esper, said in an interview that more than 100 ISIS prisoners are now on the loose in Syria as well. As you noted, the president has been facing bipartisan criticism, much of it from some of his traditional allies, Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, just yesterday, saying that he hoped that the administration is working to try to, quote, mitigate the damage made by the president's abrupt withdrawal from Syria at this time. A lot of Republicans and Democrats, and frankly the military community as well, waiting to see what the president can do to try to clean up a mess that many of them say is of his own making.
And you know, Peter, it was so abrupt, they didn't know what to do with the troops that the president ordered out of Syria. They didn't come home. The defense secretary said they were going to be in Iraq, and then apparently Iraq said, oh, not that long they're going to be here. So do we have any updated guidance as to, apparently the president has now at least been convinced by Lindsey Graham to keep a handful of troops in parts of northern Syria, but where are these other troops going to go if they're not coming home?
It's a good question. It's one that I think we're waiting to hear if the president will address here. Iraq saying that American troops could only stay there for a limited time. Remember, the basis for this, the talking point that really resonates with the president's base is this idea that we have no business. America has no business being in that region, that he's bringing troops home. But at the end of the day, after this vacuum has been created, in fact, the president is keeping troops in the region, sending more troops to Saudi Arabia, a mercenary force, as critics say, because Saudi Arabia is going to be paying the price tag for the troops being in that region. But the president, again, who said he was bringing them home, is now saying they're being redeployed to remain in that area. It's unclear for how long. Mark Esper said yesterday, the defense secretary said it was only temporarily. So we wait and see.
Well, let's go to northern Syria right now. Our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, is there. So, Richard, in the last 120 hours, we've gone from an abrupt withdrawal by the Americans to now, I guess, there's going to be a joint Russia-Turkey force that is going to patrol northern Syria. What have you seen in the last 24 hours?
Well, this is a Kurdish region. There are about 2 million Kurds who live here, and they are running for their lives. Kurds are trying to escape the country. Others are hunkering down in their homes, and they don't know what is going to happen. They, for the last 5 years, have lived under American protection. They were together fighting ISIS. They were happy. This mission was ending. U.S. troops were coming home. What happened is President Trump decided he was just going to pull the plug abruptly without a plan. not giving any clear indication to the troops themselves, to the commanders, to the neighboring countries of what happened. He greenlit an invasion from a neighboring country and betrayed the allies who were here. So now, yes, American troops were coming home anyway. Now they're just coming home in a total chaotic way. They are betraying their friends who fear for their lives. Hundreds of thousands of them have already left this area, including about 80,000 children who are living in displacement camps. And we don't know where those troops are going to probably end up. They're going to go to Iraq, and then eventually they're going to go home. So I think we're going to hear President Trump bang this campaign promise. I'm bringing the troops home. They were coming home anyway, but you don't do things like this and abandon your friends, create total madness, and create, frankly, a disgrace for the U.S. military, who is watching all of this happening. You mentioned war crimes. They are seeing their allies being slaughtered, and they do not have orders from the commander-in-chief to help them.
Are we chronicling the war crimes, since that's about the only thing they can do legally, since they can't intervene?
It's a good question. It is a very, very good question, and we will see if one day there is somebody inside the military with access to that classified intelligence, the aerial intelligence, because they're all over northern Syria. Lots of drones, lots of surveillance. They are picking up communications. They are taking pictures of all of this. Will they release it one day and show what exactly is happening here, what happened under their eyes? I think one day they might, but it would be a very, very big decision to do that. Yeah,
it would be. Let me bring in Andrea Mitchell. She's, of course, our chief foreign affairs correspondent. And Andrea, we thought it was really important to set the stage of the reality of what's happening in Syria, what's happening with Turkey and Russia, before we hear from whatever the president is about to say. What have you learned, Andrea, from what clearly was some weekend diplomacy by the Speaker of the House with Jordan's King Hussein?
Well, Jordan's King Hussein has people on the ground. There are Jordanian troops, there were British troops, other troops from other countries who were not notified when the president made this impulsive decision with President Erdogan to withdraw U.S. troops. So the allies feel very much endangered, but particularly King Abdullah. It was more or less with Nancy Pelosi and the others in her bipartisan delegation telling him America is still here, America is not abandoning the Middle East. But the basic reality now on the ground is that Vladimir Putin is the new strong person, the new strong man in the Middle East, in Syria certainly. He is now in charge of the Middle East and Syria. It is no longer the American influence in the region, and that is going to be felt for decades potentially.
Andrea, are we going to have a simple question with not a simple answer, which is, have we lost Turkey? And if we have, how do we get them back?
The relationship with Turkey is so complicated. We have lost Turkey perhaps a long time ago, but there is a mutual defense relationship. They're still members of NATO. We can't fire someone from NATO. There's no procedure to get someone out of NATO. You have to quit as a NATO member. And it was actually the Turkish Cypriot problem that created NATO in the first place. It was really that which was then extended to be against the former Soviet Union. And interestingly, the European Union is now feeling so threatened, particularly by the president's rhetoric. Oh, let the ISIS fighters go. The Europeans haven't taken them back. Let them go to Europe. They should take them from where they came from. People in Europe, leaders that I've spoken to, diplomats in Europe, really believe that there is going to be a wave of terror in Europe now because of what's happened, because they were contained, they were being held by the Syrian Kurds. And that is another issue. They are now beginning to re-examine their whole relationship with Vladimir Putin and whether they have to be friendlier to Putin rather than adversarial, as the NATO alliance always has been, because they can no longer feel they can rely on the United States.
Meanwhile, what are we to make of Turkey's ambition to become a nuclear power?
That has been there for quite a while. We've reported on it, in fact, in the past, but that is clearly one of the threats. Erdogan is not someone that can be relied upon, and you have Israel and the Saudis now concerned about the rise of Iran. Iran now will have its land bridge that it has long sought, now that it can cross through what had been Kurdish and American-patrolled areas of Syria.
Let me go back to Peter Alexander. And Peter, this is one of those times when let's admit what we're doing. We're tap dancing here a little bit because we were given We were given a heads up about 20 minutes ago he was going to speak at 11. Then it keeps sliding, and it keeps sliding, and it keeps sliding, and this is the longest. I think we're at a 15-minute, 2-minute warning here, which does happen every once in a while. He's not the first president to do this. But it wouldn't be a surprise to me if they're struggling with the language that they want him to use.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. The guidance I'm getting from officials here at the White House is that the president today is to be joined by the Vice President, Mike Pence, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, also his newly appointed National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, of course, who is Pompeo and Pence, who were just in that region trying to secure the ceasefire there. That, at the time, the president declared was a success, of course, against the backdrop of everything that we've said, the abrupt withdrawal that created this vacuum in the first place. But there's certainly been real frustration, and they are hearing it from members of the president's own base, from Lindsey Graham, from Mitch McConnell, as we noted, not just the Democrats on Capitol Hill, but some of the president's own allies. Lindsey Graham in recent weeks saying to the president, Mr. President, I will hold you accountable for these circumstances. So we wait to see what the president says here, but it's hard to see any way to kind of clean up this situation, given the circumstances that are now playing out on the ground that Richard is witnessing as we speak.
And Peter, you can't help but ask how much. We know the president doesn't compartmentalize. He just can't do it. And we know impeachment has him fired up, and there appears to be a bit of an antic or two that his supporters are trying right now on Capitol Hill. Right. Perhaps that is distracting him right now. But you can't help but wonder, how much does impeachment impact what he says on Syria?
No, you're exactly right. I mean, Chuck, yesterday it was remarkable as you looked at the sort of split screen of headlines. It was, I think most would widely agree, one of the most damning days for the president, certainly as it relates to this alleged quid pro quo between President Trump and the Ukrainian leaders, effectively, as it was testified by the top diplomat in Syria, Bill Taylor, that it was their understanding that they were withholding military aid and a White House meeting for Ukraine until the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, publicly, in a public statement, said that he would launch investigations not just into alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election, but into the Bidens as well. I mean, there are Republicans. John Thune, he is a Republican number 2 in the Senate, who just today said, while he would like this all to be done publicly, not privately, as the process is playing out right now, he said from what he is seeing, including the opening statement that was released from Bill Taylor just yesterday, he said he is concerned by it. There is great concern among the Republicans because the challenge, they can no longer say there was no quid pro quo based on what Bill Taylor said. The question is how they try, how the president tries to explain it.
We are awaiting, thank you, Peter, we are awaiting the president. He, earlier this morning, the White House advised that the president had some important remarks to give and an update on Syria. We are awaiting that. We wanted to give the picture of what we understand to be the situation in Syria right now. We've been doing that, and we're still waiting for the president after they gave us a 2-minute warning. I think we are on minute 18 of this 2-minute warning. Andrea Mitchell, I want to go back to you here a minute, and it has to do with the process. What we learned from the ambassador yesterday about Ukraine is that essentially the process got hijacked. Turkey and Syria, are we confident that this process wasn't also hijacked?
We're not. In fact, Rudy Giuliani has connections to Turkey as well, was advocating for the extradition of a prominent cleric, a Turkish expatriate cleric who's been living in Pennsylvania. This was one of the things that Mike Flynn was advocating for, and doing it for money. And it was part of the whole legal problems, the indictment and conviction and pleading guilty by Mike Flynn, the National Security Advisor, for about 28 days. And so Giuliani apparently was also representing Erdogan, and we don't know what the financial arrangements were and whether or not he had ever filed a Foreign Agent Representation Act, which was what got Mike Flynn and others involved in the Mueller investigation implicated. So that is an active investigation as well. So we don't know whether Rudy Giuliani had some involvement here behind the scenes with Erdogan, but we do know that some of his people were involved with Erdogan before that phone call, that critical phone call with the president. I just want to also point out that the White House had really come out after William Taylor and connecting William Taylor to their criticism of the Democrats. William Taylor came back to service at Mike Pompeo's request. He was a retired senior ambassador, and he went back after Yovanovitch was pulled back and summarily, dismissed from her post by Pompeo, which is that connection to Pompeo. So for Mike Pompeo and Mike Pence, both of whom were involved in the Ukraine issue, to be flanking the president as his wingman today as they come into the diplomatic reception room there for this set piece on Syria, raises a lot of other questions as well. They are involved now in the impeachment investigation.
Look, when we're talking Erdogan, I think there's nobody in our team that has spent enough time in Turkey to try to figure him out than Richard Engel. And Richard, and again, I want to just remind viewers, we are here awaiting the president. I think we're in minute 20 of this 2-minute warning now. But Erdogan's motive, that somehow, what is it that Erdogan is offering the president, motivating the president, pushing the president? What is it that he's offering for the head of the imam, of the cleric that's in Pennsylvania? What kind of I don't know, what kind of leverage does Erdogan throw around that he seems to get the Trump administration to do some of its deeds for it?
It's very hard to know if there was some quid pro quo or if it has to do with Trump Towers in Istanbul or anything like that. But let's not get away from what is actually happening. And what happened here is being described as a crime against humanity. There is ethnic cleansing underway, hundreds of thousands of people running away from their homes because of a Turkish invasion that President Trump allowed to happen. And you have American troops who are on the ground in a position to stop it, who were ordered not to. The president is about to go out and explain what this war was all about. In the United States, there are long memories of the Iraq War, of the ongoing Afghanistan war, when large numbers of U.S. troops, sometimes National Guard units, were deployed in the Middle East, and they were caught up in a civil war that seemed like it had nothing to do with America and nothing to do with the troops. This here in northern Syria had nothing to do with that. It was a totally different mission. It was a small number of elite special operations forces who, by the way, do not want to go and who had a very specific mission. It was to find and kill and capture ISIS members. And they were doing it incredibly well. They killed between 60 and 100,000 of them, and they imprisoned tens of thousands of ISIS members and ISIS supporters. This was not Iraq. This was not Afghanistan. These were not National Guard units. These are some of the most elite troops who still have a mission. This is the highest concentration of ISIS supporters anywhere in the world. So if it is presented that these are American troops who are coming home like those old troops in Iraq should have come home, or like those old troops in Afghanistan should come home, this was different. This was a specific operation that is still, according to many U.S. military officials, absolutely necessary, that is being carried out by highly secretive, highly elite troops. They're being pulled out after President Trump gave Turkey this green light to go ahead and invade. Those troops are going to go out. We're not going to tell anybody what the plan is, and the ISIS could very easily use this opportunity to be reborn. So keep that in mind as President Trump makes this speech saying it's been a great success and the American troops are coming home and we're going to wave the flag. And by the way, very, very, very few American troops here were being killed or even wounded. This was a specific operation. It was the Kurds who are now awaiting what they think could be their extinction from their homeland, who were doing a lot of the fighting, taking the casualties, losing 11,000 of their men and women fighting with U.S. troops.
What uncomfortable alliance do you think the Kurds end up going into? One with Assad, one with Iran. What do they end up doing in order to essentially survive this Turkish onslaught?
They don't know, and that's why you haven't had an official statement from the Kurds right now. They are not just between a rock and a hard spot. They are between 12 rocks and 12 hard spots. They are being attacked from not just Turkey, but radical militias. A family was just beheaded today, according to Kurdish officials, by a radical Turkish-backed militia. That has been lost in all of this, by the way, that Turkey is using former ISIS and al-Qaeda members to terrorize the Kurds to get them to leave this area. So they certainly don't trust the Turks. They certainly don't trust these militias. They're terrified of them. The militias have been posting videos online in order to get the people to leave their houses more quickly so they don't have to fight them, which is an old ISIS tactic. They don't trust the Syrian regime, which is now moving in, because a lot of these Kurds had independence. They also didn't do military service because they were here with the U.S. fighting against ISIS. So they're worried that as the regime comes in, they're all going to get arrested, and they're not sure what to do with Russia. Do we trust them? Do we not? We just trusted the U.S. Maybe Russia's better. So they are making a million calculations, and that is why they're trying at least to get their families out, and they're not sure if they're ever going to.
Richard, we're supposedly not pulling everybody out. Now, what can a small special ops unit or two do?
They can kill a lot of ISIS members. That's what they do. That is what they were here doing in small numbers. At the height of the troop numbers here, there were only about 2,000. And then about 2 weeks ago, before this all began, they were down to 1,000. So it's not like there was some massive occupying army. President Trump keeps saying they were policing. They don't police. They don't police. They go out on missions. They kill ISIS members. They come back. They go out again. That's what they do. And now they're being sent to who knows where. So if a few small number are here, they will continue to go and find and hunt down ISIS members. But the people that they were protecting, the Kurds who have been helping them, they're not going to be in a position to help
might be
them.
alone.
They are now at the mercy of Assad, and they might be doing it for the world, for America, for Assad. They will be a counter-ISIS fight for everybody, but in a tiny number and not protecting the Kurds.
All right, we got ready for this one, Richard? We got a new 3-minute warning now, which we think we've used up a minute of, but we shall see. Let me check in on Capitol Hill, where, of course, most of the action on Capitol Hill is another day of private depositions in the impeachment inquiry. And Jeff Bennett, I know there was a bit of, I guess, a stunt that some House Republicans attempted to pull, those very close to the president. Maybe that delayed him as he watched it played out on social media.
Yeah, and House Republicans, Chuck, actually came out not too long ago to give us the play-by-play. What you had was a number of Republicans enter the secure area, which is on the other side of where I'm talking to you, and they basically, for lack of a better phrase, tried to bum rush the room where Laura Cooper was being deposed. A number of those Republicans brought their personal cell phones into that secure area, which is a huge violation. They, in their own defense, said that the deposition that was being undertaken was not classified. But on any other day, in any other universe, something like that would be a huge violation. And the reason why Laura Cooper matters to this ongoing impeachment inquiry is because she is the Defense Department official, career official, by the way, who would have had responsibility for overseeing Ukraine policy. And so as Democrats scrutinize the role that this withheld Ukrainian aid played in this alleged plot, this pressure campaign to coerce the Ukrainian president to dig up or manufacture dirt on the Bidens, the thinking is that she would be able to provide some insight into that decision, why that decision was made to hold up that Ukrainian aid, even though the Defense Department at the time recommended that it move forward, Chuck.
So, Jeff, I'm confused. So the critique is this is being done in private, which is the exact same way House Republicans ran the Benghazi committee. So they're complaining that the same tactics that were used by Trey Gowdy and the Benghazi committee is somehow not okay if the Democrats are in charge?
Right. So this appears to be the battle that Republicans are fighting on this day to win the overall messaging war. So they say that all of this, because impeachment is a political process, it should be a public process. And these depositions that are happening behind closed doors should be happening in the light of day. Well, Democrats say to Republicans, they will get their wish. Adam Schiff has made clear that there will be a public process to this. In fact, he says that some of the witnesses who are now being deposed privately will be brought back for public testimony. So Schiff has described this phase of this fact-finding inquiry as the committees really working as a grand jury. And grand juries obviously don't make public what's happening here. So again, Republicans still continue to attack the process. What you're not seeing is a significant, vigorous defense on the merits of President Trump's interaction with Ukraine's president.
Jeff Bennett on Capitol Hill for us there. We were just told that we expect to hear from the president very, very shortly. It is imminent, we were told. All we can tell you is the president says he's got something to say on Syria. They want to update where they believe that what his policy has been a success. We've laid out for you how this is a policy that is extraordinarily unpopular on Capitol Hill, getting bipartisan concern on this. A lot of American allies around the world very concerned about this decision, very concerned that the appearance of the United States walking away from a problem in the Middle East, Russia filling the vacuum that is being there, all of that setting that stage for you as we await to hear the president on this. And again, he views it as a political promise kept to try to get out of these wars, but we shall see. We do know now that we had earlier reporting this week, the Defense Department was so caught off guard by Syria, they don't want to get caught off guard if the president abruptly decides to pull everybody out of Afghanistan. And so in a need to be essentially to be prepared in case the president makes another abrupt decision, they have a contingency plan about how to withdraw from Afghanistan if necessary. So a lot of this, some of this is infused with politics. Some of this goes back to old campaign stuff. Some of this is President Trump's long-held beliefs about military intervention. And, of course, some of this is wrapped up into what is also happening on Capitol Hill. We're seeing pictures there of the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor. They're making their way in. I think the word's imminent, and there's the president is apropos. Here he is.
Well, thank you very much. My fellow Americans, I greet you this morning from the White House to announce a major breakthrough toward achieving a better future for Syria and for the Middle East. It's been a long time. Over the last 5 days, you have seen that a ceasefire that we established along Syria's border has held, and it's held very well, beyond most expectations. Early this morning, the government of Turkey informed my administration that they would be stopping combat and their offensive in Syria and making the ceasefire permanent, and it will indeed be permanent. However, you would also define the word permanent in that part of the world as somewhat questionable. We all understand that, but I do believe it will be permanent. I've therefore instructed the Secretary of the Treasury to lift all sanctions imposed on October 14th in response to Turkey's original offensive moves against the Kurds in Syria's northeast border region. So the sanctions will be lifted unless something happens that we're not happy with. This was an outcome created by us, the United States, and nobody else, no other nation. Very simple. And we're willing to take blame, and we're also willing to take credit. This is something they've been trying to do for many, many decades. Since then, others have come out to help, and we welcome them to do so. Other countries have stepped forward. They want to help, and we think that's great. The nations in the region must ultimately take on the responsibility of helping Turkey and Syria police their border. We want other nations to get involved. We've secured the oil, and therefore a small number of U.S. troops will remain in the area where they have the oil. And we're going to be protecting it, and we'll be deciding what we're going to do with it in the future. In any event, by the moves that we've made, we are achieving a much more peaceful and stable area between Turkey and Syria, including a 20-mile wide safe zone. An interesting term, safe zone. That's the term we're using. Hopefully, that zone will become safe. Thousands and thousands of people have been killed in that zone over the years. But it's been sought for many, many decades, and I think we have something that's going to be strong and hold up. Turkey, Syria, and all forms of the Kurds have been fighting for centuries. We have done them a great service, and we've done a great job for all of them. And now we're getting out. Long time. We were supposed to be there for 30 days, That was almost 10 years ago. So we're there for 30 days, and now we're leaving. It was supposed to be a very quick hit, and let's get out. And it was a quick hit, except they stayed for almost 10 years. Let someone else fight over this long, blood-stained sand. I want to thank Vice President Pence and Secretary of State Pompeo for leading the American delegation so successfully to Turkey several days ago, along with National Security Advisor O'Brien. I want to thank them very much. The American delegation negotiated the original 5-day ceasefire that ended Kurdish fighters to safely leave. It just got them to a point where, frankly, they were able, it enabled them to get out, to go and move really just a few miles in a slightly different direction. So this enabled them to do so. Countless lives are now being saved as a result of our negotiation with Turkey, an outcome reached without spilling one drop of American blood. No injuries, nobody shot, nobody killed. I have just spoken to General Mazlum, a wonderful man, the commander-in-chief of the SDF Kurds, and he was extremely thankful for what the United States has done. Could not have been more thankful. General Mazlum has assured me that ISIS is under very, very strict lock and key, and the detention facilities are being strongly maintained. There were a few that got out, a small number, relatively speaking, and they've been largely recaptured. I'm also sure that he will be issuing his own statement very shortly. We had a great talk, but we've saved the lives of many, many Kurds. He understands that. The war was going to be vicious and probably not very long. And I'm very happy to have been involved in it, as are our Vice President, our Secretary of State, and all of the other people on our team. By getting that ceasefire to stick, we've done something that's very, very special. But by getting the ceasefire after a tremendous amount of really tough war for a very short period of days, that is something very special. Our troops are safe, and the pain and suffering of the 3-day fight that occurred was directly responsible for our ability to make an agreement with Turkey and the Kurds that could never have been made without this short-term outburst. Should Turkey fail to honor its obligations, including the protection of religious and ethnic minorities, which I truly believe they will do, we reserve the right to reimpose crippling sanctions, including substantially increased tariffs on steel and all other products coming out of Turkey. We are now an economic powerhouse like never before, and very importantly, like no other. Our economic might is stronger than it's ever been, and our competitors are not doing very well. We also expect Turkey to abide by its commitment regarding ISIS as a backup to the Kurds, watching over them. Should something happen, Turkey is there to grab them. Further, we implore European countries to come and take those fighters that the U.S. captured and bring them back to their countries for incarceration and for trial. Until just recently, Europe has been very unresponsive in doing what they should have been doing for a long time. Now is their chance to finally act. American forces defeated 100% of the ISIS caliphate during the last 2 years. We thank the Syrian Democratic Forces for their sacrifices in this effort. They've been terrific. Now Turkey, Syria, and others in the region must work to ensure that ISIS does not regain any territory. It's their neighborhood. They have to maintain it. They have to take care of it. There were some political pundits who responded to Turkey's offensive in Syria by calling for yet another American military intervention. I don't think so. But halting the incursion by military force would have required deploying tens of thousands of American troops against Turkey, a NATO ally, and a country the United States has developed a very good relationship with, including President Erdogan. The same people that I watched and read giving me and the United States advice were the people that I have been watching and reading for many years. They are the ones that got us into the Middle East mess, but never had the vision or the courage to get us out. They just talk. How many Americans must die in the Middle East in the midst of these ancient sectarian and tribal conflicts? After all of the precious blood and treasure America has poured into the deserts of the Middle East, I am committed to pursuing a different course, one that leads to victory for America. Through much work, we have done things that everybody said couldn't be done. Today's announcement validates our course of action with Turkey that only a couple of weeks ago was scorned. And now people are saying, wow, what a great outcome. Congratulations. It's too early to me to be congratulated, but we've done a good job. We've saved a lot of lives. Most importantly, we have avoided another costly military intervention that could have led to disastrous, far-reaching consequences. Many thousands of people could have been killed. The last administration said Assad must go. They could have easily produced that outcome, but they didn't. In fact, they drew a very powerful red line in the sand. You all remember the red line in the sand when children were gassed and killed, but then did not honor their commitment as other children died in the same horrible manner. But I did honor my commitments with 58 Tomahawks. 8 long years after President Obama's ill-fated push at regime change, U.S. troops are still on the ground in Syria. More than 500,000 people are dead, hundreds of thousands are terribly injured, and millions more Syrians are displaced. It really is a nightmare of misery. Across the Middle East, we have seen anguish on a colossal scale. We have spent $8 trillion on wars in the Middle East, never really wanting to win those wars. But after all that money was spent and all those lives lost, the young men and women gravely wounded so many. The Middle East is less safe, less stable, and less secure than before these conflicts began. The same people pushing for these wars are often the ones demanding America open its doors to unlimited migration from war-torn regions, importing the terrorism and the threat of terrorism right to our own shores. But not anymore. My administration understands that immigration security is national security. As a candidate for president, I made clear that we needed a new approach to American foreign policy, one guided not by ideology, but by experience, history, and a realistic understanding of the world. We are building up America's military might like never before, investing $2.5 trillion since my election. But we will not be depleted. We will not happen again. It will not be allowed to happen again, where our military is depleted, fighting in areas of the world where we shouldn't be. When we commit American troops to battle, we must do so only when a vital national interest is at stake. And when we have a clear objective, a plan for victory, and a path out of conflict, that's what we have to have. We need a plan of victory. We will only win. Our whole basis has to be the right plan, and then we will only win. Nobody can beat us. Nobody can beat us. I want to again thank everyone on the American team who helped achieve the ceasefire in Syria, saved so many lives, along with President Erdogan of Turkey, a man I've gotten to know very well, and a man who loves his country. And in his mind, he's doing the right thing for his country. And we may be meeting in the very near future. I also want to thank General Mazloum for his understanding and for his great strength and for his incredible words today to me, but me just as a representative of the United States, because he knows that we saved tens of thousands of Kurds. And we're not talking in the long term, we're talking in the short term. We're talking something that was going on immediately and something, frankly, that was planned for a long time. The job of our military is not to police the world. Other nations must step up and do their fair share. That hasn't taken place. Today's breakthrough is a critical step in that direction. Thank you all very much, and God bless America. Thank you.
Mr. President, you said that the ISIS fighters who escaped have been recaptured, but today your top envoy said that's not true, that they don't know where they are. Do you have a comment?
We were just waiting there to see her. You never know with President Trump. Sometimes he does take a shouted question or two. The big news that the president announced is whatever sanctions we were going to impose on Turkey, those have been pulled back. It is not clear if the sanctions that we had announced as a government had ever actually been implemented. But either way, a sort of reward, I guess, for the Turks. At least that's how the president seemed to characterize it there. There's a lot to unpack with what he said. Again, the one fact I wanted to lead with was that, because everything else, I think, is going to take some reporting to try to figure out what actually happened, what was actually said by the general in Syria. But let me go to Peter Alexander. Let's start with the idea that yesterday Jim Jeffrey went on Capitol Hill and he himself said he knew of one at least war crime that the Turks committed. That is not the picture that President Trump painted of the Turks and the Kurds, and if anything, seemed to reward the Turks by promising no more sanctions.
Yeah, no, Chuck, I think you put it perfectly there. It is Turkey who is being rewarded here. This is what Turkey wanted all along. There are no sanctions on them. They have now, in effect, annexed that portion of Syria, that 20-mile stretch wide that goes for 200-plus miles across that country there. And you know, at the end of the day, there is no consequence for the Turks here. The president made a couple statements that I think need some fact-checking. For one, remember, over the course of the last several weeks, he has said we are bringing American troops home. In these comments today, he said that we are leaving a small number of troops behind in northern Syria. Separately, he said that only a few got out, in reference to ISIS fighters who were being held there in northern Syria. That is at odds with the facts as communicated by his own Defense Secretary Mark Esper just yesterday, and again by the special envoy in the Trump administration to Syria today, Jim Jeffrey, who said that more than 100 ISIS fighters are in effect unaccounted for at this time. So that, I think, is where we start. Richard, you're going to get to, and he will certainly fact-check what we are hearing from the Kurds right now. The president saying that he was praised. He, in effect, praised himself for the vision and courage to come up with this solution, saying that he was saving tens of thousands of Kurdish lives. But as we speak, it is the Kurds who are burying their loved ones and who remain on the run. Right.
And we know he made an ideological argument about getting out of the Middle East. What he failed to remind Americans is that he has ordered 14,000 troops into the Middle East. That is very new into Saudi Arabia. So to add to the fact checks there, let's not forget this president has sent more troops to the Middle East in the last 2 months than the handful that he has withdrawn. Richard Engel, you heard his comments about the General Maslun, who I believe you've spoken with a number of times, he quoted the general as saying some things that I think would be a surprise to you.
No, they wouldn't. I've met with General Maslum many times. He is very polite. He is looking for friends. He is in a corner. He is almost a hostage right now. He has nowhere to turn to. So, of course, he's going to be polite to President Trump. He still hopes there could be some sort of future for him, for his fighters, for the Kurdish people. What we just saw was President Trump thanking himself for stopping a war that he effectively allowed to happen. He gave Turkey the green light to do it effectively by pulling U.S. troops away from the border, issuing a statement saying that Turkey's going to invade before Turkey invaded. In that statement saying that U.S. troops would not get in their way. Turkey did invade, and then throughout the course of its invasion, President Trump saying they just need to fight it out, appearing to egg Turkey on and let this go on. He now is saying we should be thankful that the Kurds weren't completely wiped out in this campaign that he himself helped unleash. Also, nobody here, except perhaps for General Maslum, who's in a very weak position right now, is listening to President Trump. Nobody cares in northern Syria what he says anymore. Vladimir Putin is the man in charge right now. The one image that everyone across the Middle East is going to remember is that Russian troops moved in as U.S. troops betrayed an ally, as American troops were told, you can't help the friends who fought with you. And American troops pulling out of this country as their own friends were throwing rotten fruit and vegetable at their cars, holding up signs saying, we love you, American troops, but your commander-in-chief betrayed us. Those two images are going to be much more powerful than the president just congratulating himself a day late and a dollar short for a ceasefire that Vladimir Putin imposed yesterday.
Richard Engel in northern Syria, Peter Alexander at the White House, Andrew Mitchell earlier, and Jeff Bennett on Capitol Hill. Big thanks to the entire NBC News team and the specials team. Did a lot of tap dancing today. Look, as this situation in Syria continues to unfold, we will be all over this story, all over what's happening on Capitol Hill, and we will see you tonight with Lester Holt on the Nightly News. For now, I'm Chuck Todd, NBC News.